I felt, it was like a heaviness on my chest. When I saw that, I just...
Yeah. Talk about providence. There's something to prepare you for that kind of a mission. But what is it that a casualty assistance officer actually does? Well, as you mentioned, there are 3 real phases to honoring our fallen. First is notification. We see this in the movies often, where a car drives up to the door and someone gets out and walks up to a house, usually with a church, a priest, a pastor, or some family members. Well, that's the way we do it today. But in World War II, a telegram arrived.
Oh, I remember that. I saw that in movies.
Yes.
They would get a telegram, and somebody would think, oh my goodness, my son's coming home. In fact, I was watching something, and maybe it was from, I'm not sure if it was that or another film that I was watching, and she got so excited, oh, I got a telegram, my son's coming home, and then reads the telegram that your son is either missing in action or was killed. And it's so traumatic just to read it in a telegram.
It is. And in the case of Mary Obinsky, Joey's mother, and his sister and brother, it was particularly difficult because the year before, their other brother, the other son, Robert, had become a prisoner of war in Europe. He was on his first mission as a B-17 bomber pilot, and he was shot down and spent the entire war then in a prisoner of war camp.
Was he...
He stayed in for a year, a little over almost 2 years, and he was repatriated and freed. He lived all the way up till 2007.
Wow.
Unfortunately, never knowing for sure what happened to his older brother, Joey. So he passed away.
And that's pretty sad, because if you have somebody, people need closure, families need closure. Wives need closure, or their husbands, if a woman is in the military. And when you don't get any closure, when somebody's missing in action, possibly the spouse doesn't know, they can't remarry because they know maybe that they're coming back, and they're always wishful thinking that they're coming back, or time goes on, and what happens to these people? What happens to a spouse that after 10 years, do they remarry? Do they still wait? Maybe they feel that they're still a prisoner of war and they're in a camp somewhere, in a prison. I mean, what goes on with this?
In the case of Mary Obinsky, Joey's mother, she always held out hope that her son would also be a prisoner of war held by the Japanese, because the other son was in a German camp. So the hope was there right up until she died in 1946. I know this because I've seen letters between her and the mothers of the other crew members, and very emotional letters to see how that they held out through their faith and through their confidence that one day their sons would come home. But time does tell, and eventually a decision had to be made. And that's what happened, was they decided that they weren't coming home. That doesn't mean that we give up. And for your audience to know that just because they're gone now doesn't mean they're gone from our hearts or from our minds, and we're not going to stop looking. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. In the case of Burma, there's the mountains, the Himalayas, and there's the jungle. And when the jungle takes, it doesn't give back much. So,
but I remember in the documentary how they got some natives and that were in Burma, and and they have to go through the jungle and cut away a lot of the brush, and just to get through, just to walk through.
Right, and in this case, that's exactly what happened. A native of the Kachin region in Burma found a dog tag, an ID tag, and on that dog tag was the name Joseph M. Obinsky.
Isn't that something?
Talk about amazing. There were 2 ID tags. The other one was Richard Dawson, who was one of the privates from Merrill's Marauders, who was on the aircraft as well. And with that, it was able to lead JPAC, which you'd mentioned before, to being able in 2004 find the aircraft. So we're talking 60 years has passed. There wasn't much left, but there was enough so that last July, at Arlington National Cemetery, that crew was finally put to rest.
Oh my goodness! So what happened? What went on as a casualty assistance officer, what was your duty to the families?
That's where my role came in.
Okay, what is your role?
When I was given this assignment, the first thing that I did was, and I went through extensive training leading up to this, so that I knew how to approach the family member.
Oh, maybe tell what kind of training do you get?
Well, our training is both the details of assisting the family, but also the emotional side. I wasn't the notification officer. That is a different person who gives the initial notification, like you see in the movies nowadays. That had been done already. But with Mr. Michael Mee from the Past Conflicts Resolutions Branch, he and I met. We went to Edwin Obinski, who lives over in McHenry County, and told this whole story of what had happened back then and what has happened since to find his brother's remains. Eddie was only 14 when his brother was reported missing.
So how did he feel when, I mean, this was closure. This is what we call closure.
This was the beginning of closure, the beginning of closure. To help transition through that, there's paperwork, like anything, there's always paperwork.
But what did the brother, when he found that he finally found the remains of his brother, who has been missing for how many years again?
66 years.
66 years. What was that emotion all about? Did he still, what did you experience?
Well, keeping in mind, he's in his 80s.
Okay.
And he was very strong, but it was, like you said, relief to a certain degree. Finally, we can get closure and know what has happened and bury his brother. And that was the way it felt for all of the family members that I met at the funeral. But there were steps in between there, getting us to Arlington National Cemetery, where in Section 60 this crew was interned. That's what my duty as the casualty assistance officer was. Part of that also was to reunite the members of, well, in this particular case, the only person I was responsible for was Captain Obinski's brother, Eddie.
Because the father and his mother were already deceased.
Oh, for some time.
And there was no spouse.
There was no spouse.
Or children in this particular case. And the only remaining person was the brother.
Right. His other brother, who had been a prisoner of war, had already passed on. And his other sister had died some years ago as well.
Isn't that something?
So he was the last direct blood relative. And that's pretty significant.
You're still working on this. It's interesting. I mean, we only think of the wars, maybe the war in Vietnam, the war, and the present wars. We're thinking, but you're really still working, and the Army and the military is still working on a war that was fought in the 40s. That's very interesting.
In studying this and getting to know how Past Conflicts Resolution Branch work, it even popped up that a casualty from World War I was found in our current conflict.
Oh my goodness.
So there is always a chance, and we hold out for these opportunities.
That's why I brought you on the show today, because these are things that people, our civilians, myself, was unaware that this is still going on. And there's so many things that the military does. I mean, we only see what, like I was just looking here in the paper the other day, and I saw 3 young men from the same family. They were coming home for the Christmas holiday, and 3 brothers are in the service together. They're all in different units, and military service family commitment. I mean, this is really things that people aren't aware, that it isn't just one person from the family, but it could be 3, like this is three brothers.
In the case of one of the crew members of Captain Obinski's aircraft, 5 brothers out of 10 siblings.
How do you like that?
All of them served together.